So Jason, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really well, Chris. Yeah, absolutely. A lot on. I think this year has just been one big blur, to be totally honest. But yeah, it's been amazing, and can't wait for next year. To be honest, a lot planned already.
I'm going to ask a really stupid question. Is there more work when it's raining?
Yes, yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Because that's when people forget that they've not unblocked their gutters in about 6 months, and then water starts coming in from all sorts of angles, or a chimney stack, goes wrong, or especially when it gets into winter months as well, when people don't check the heating before they need it, and then things start cracking, or pipes and all sorts of stuff, and then plumbers can't get round, and everyone just goes into chaos. So, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So you like the sound of the rain then?
Absolutely. I love the rain. Yeah, it's great. I live in Cornwall, so I get a lot of it.
Amazing. So Jason, just give everyone a bit of context. They might not have joined our first webinar that we did together, but who are you? What it is that you do, and how do you support people with their well-being through property?
Absolutely. So, yeah, my name's Jason Radcliffe. I live down in almost sunny Cornwall. Depends on the day you're down in. But basically, I travel the country and I'm an advocate for kind of well-being and the synergy between the homes and the buildings we work and live in and the people within them, and try and give free or at least affordable advice to vulnerable families to be able to make sure that they can recognize the risks in their homes and then be able to actually do something about it, whether it's from a landlord's perspective or an elderly relative's perspective or somebody who's just moved into their first rental property. I also have the Atlantic Edge Property Group, which is a Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyor surveying firm. So that's, I suppose, the bread and butter kind of stuff that goes on. But yeah, that's what I do, and I try and do it through as many outlets as free as possible. I run drop-in clinics. I've got a few around the country next year, where essentially I go into highly populated areas and sit there for about 4 hours for anyone, completely anonymously, no sales obligations, literally nothing like that. Come in and actually have a chat about their problems face to face. So yeah, I do as much as I possibly can, really, to help people.
And you asked me a really interesting question when we were off camera, which was, are you one of these founders that wants to get to a certain point and then you're quite happy with that business and if it's profitable and you're quite happy to stay in your lane, or are you one of these people that wants to sort of keep building and keep creating and that kind of thing? And my answer was that, yeah, I'm quite ambitious. I want to keep creating and I love the process of it. And you said that you were as well. But when you've just said, all the stuff that you do, the clinics, all the stuff that you've got going on, that's quite a hefty schedule. Let alone you're also about to be a published author and you're doing a PhD at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, so I've been doing my PhD in basically looking at synthetic and natural insulation in older buildings to basically prove without a shadow of a doubt that natural insulation is healthier for you and it should be installed and planned on a, I suppose, case by case basis rather than a one size fits all, which we often see in the industry. So that's coming to the end now, which is good. I've kind of done about 4 years of research, and yeah, I've developed a prototype, I suppose, in real life climate chamber, so you can test U values, so thermal efficiency of buildings any time of the year, which is kind of the first of its kind, which is pretty cool. And yeah, my book, it's at the final stages of being written now, which weirdly lines up with what's happening kind of after my PhD. So it's looking very much at what we call off-gassing. So if you've got materials or you've got cleaning products, anything like that in your home, it's the gases and the toxins and things that then come off of that over a duration, which is called the residual. So even when you finish with bleach, for example, or adhesions for your carpets, things like that, there will be things like formaldehyde, benzene, all that kind of stuff that goes into your air. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is it doesn't just stop there. It then has what's called a secondary chemical reaction to the internal, what's already in your air. And then also when you open a window, for example, it's then the gas, the trace gases outside, which then come in. So it's really complex. So yeah, basically it's the next, I suppose, the next chapter after my PhD, and I've just formally kind of putting together a collaboration with NASA's research team as well, which is pretty cool regarding that. So I'll be using their satellites and yeah, all sorts of really cool stuff. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
How did you get a gig with NASA? That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything I do is kind of outside the box thinking. I'm very much, I don't like thinking of myself as a straightforward surveyor. So, although there's nothing wrong with that. So I was kind of looking at ways I could bring more value to my research outside of the normal stuff. So I was kind of wanting somebody who had massive amounts of data on what you call kind of column trace gases. So it would be from the satellite orbiting to the ground surface. That's called a column. And then we can then calculate what's on the surface trace gases as well, based on some kit that I've developed. And then working together, we can then put something pretty accurate together. So we can then hopefully start having a working model where the general public, completely free of charge, be able to then put their postcode in, for example, put a bit about them, their property, and yeah, and then it will come up with almost like a molecular fingerprint or an internal air quality fingerprint based on your property and what's around you, and then it will be able to give you good kind of optimal times to when to open windows, for example, because if you're right next to a busy main road or even next to fields where you get pesticides from, farm machinery. So it will be able to help monitor that and improve your home just a little bit more.
So is that quite dangerous then? If you've got sort of pesticides being used in the farm next door, or
Yeah, it
even
can be. Yeah. Yeah.
I've worked in hospitality before, and they wouldn't allow you to use bleach on high chairs for
Mm.
babies and stuff because of
Yeah.
how corrosive it is. But obviously, it's letting off a secondary gas. Is that quite dangerous in the in the
It
property?
is, yeah, absolutely. So things from pesticides through to, I think weirdly enough, there's studies now saying that organic food, such as chicken things, are potentially more harmful to consume than the ones that aren't treated as well because they're allowed out in the fields and then they're fed on corn and organic things, but then they're consuming what the pesticides of the field of the plants, etc. So then you're consuming that. So yeah, it's really kind of just this cycle of going, well, what do you do? And if you're trying to be healthy or trying to be ethically correct in your choices.
Yeah.
But yeah, bleach is one of those household products that is a nightmare. People use it for everything because it works. You put it on mold, for example, and it will get rid of it or at least kill the bit that's there. But then that residual kind of gases and all that kind of off-gassing and pollutants that then go into the air. I don't know if you've ever had it because I'm really quite sensitive to this sort of stuff. If you've just been in a freshly cleaned house with bleach, give me less than 5 minutes and I can't breathe. And it's like that for a lot of people. And I'm now in my 30s, so imagine what it's like for kids.
Yeah, I used to only when I'd previously worked in hospitality, I'd only clean with bleach. Like that was my rule because I knew I'd get it clean. But
Yeah.
after probably about 2 months, my fingertips actually lost so I actually lost the fingerprint on the ends of my fingers.
I
Um,
wouldn't tell too many people that, burglaries and stuff will
yeah, Coventry's never been the same again. But yeah, and I do know people that would actually have like uh, blood coming through the ends of their fingertips and
yeah,
nose
yeah.
hair falling out, all that sort of stuff. And you have to
Well,
think,
weirdly enough, you can go the opposite way with cleaning your home. Your home, there is research now to state that, homes can be too clean. And, that balance between, I suppose, unhealthy dirt, I suppose that's the only way you can really put it. So it's, like when you say let kids play in the mud and things like that, because it builds their immune system. If you kill everything in your home and it's too clean, you then don't ever build an immunity to anything. And it can actually be more of a detriment than having a slightly dirtier home. So it's that balance in between.
yeah, absolutely. I'm a massive advocate for this, particularly when Emily says that we need to clean the house at the weekend. That is my number one, yeah, stat or fact
Absolutely. Yeah.
thrown out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that we need that resilience. We need to give our
Exactly.
survive.
Exactly.
So yeah, in terms of bringing it back to property and
Yes.
the basis of what this webinar is about tonight, because we're obviously talking about AI, and we spoke. I was literally driving through Newcastle when you phoned, and
Yeah.
signal was dipping out, but you were telling me about some developments in AI that are really going to help landlords and property developers out. So before we get on to the tech side of it, let's just sort of recap on some of the major changes, which is OWAB's law, which is basically that landlords now have a legal requirement to make sure that the mold and the damp is sorted in the house. So that's something that we kind of need to address. And certainly with the work that you're doing and exploring, that's something that you're going out and trying to educate people on every single day.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And very much, I think AWAB's law has given tenants the power and the voice to be able to be heard. And I think this is something which is so important. And unfortunately, it had to come at such a horrific event for people to listen and actually make something happen. But if there's any kind of dampness or mold or any even a musky smell, it doesn't even have to be visible. You need to take action as a tenant. That's really important. And communicating that with the landlord is half the battle, because a lot of people ignore it or they think it's not as harmful as it is. And you have a very set amount of time, what a landlord does, for you to then be able to go ahead and actually action and get a surveyor in, a specialist, and be able to then diagnose it. But the important part about it is that accountability, because AWAB's law does not necessarily mean that as a tenant, you just have full reign over your landlord and going, yes, I'm going to go and get all this work done because I want it. And the law says I can. It's a very much a balance between saying, okay, well, occupant behavior, is it, what degree is it potentially the tenant's fault or cause? Is it about re-educating the home, kind of the tenants in that home, or is it actually a neglectful landlord, whether they're doing it, because they don't have the money or they just don't understand the importance of it? So I think that is really important to be able to then legally enforce action and investigation on your landlord. I think that is yeah, that's going to be doing wonders for the industry, I think.
Yeah, I mean, having seen the other side of this from a managing agent's perspective, that there was a process that was followed, and it's probably not the right process, and ethically, it definitely wasn't. But it would be initially question the tenant on their behaviour. Are they drying clothes in the home? Are they airing the rooms out? Are they causing condensation within the property that's being trapped? If it is, then it's purely down to the tenant's responsibility. If they're answering no to those issues, then it's a case of, do the windows have trickle vents in them? No, they don't have trickle vents. Right, we can bill the landlord for some trickle vents being put into the property, into the windows, and then that will cause a bit of ventilation. If not, might need a core vent in there. And then if there's still a problem with that, then there would be the sponges or the sort of moisture extractors that were stuck to
Yeah,
the
yeah.
ceiling. And it never really solved the issue. Um,
Well,
be-
this is the problem, and I think again with a lot of council houses as well, and all of this type of stuff is private. Everything, even down to looking at flats, for example, leases, and looking at how management companies are dealing with things. It is unfortunately not as simple as going, "Are you drying clothes in your house? Okay, that must be the reason for it." It's like it could be a contributing factor, but without actually having the whole picture and being able to understand the whole picture, you don't know to what degree that is, because it's very easy, especially in kind of old Victorian houses, things like that, where there might be bay windows and things that are solid brick, for example, that are like 200 mil thick, or a dormer that's like 120 mil thick, and it's just rubbish, and it's freezing cold. These sorts of things are pretty common, big contributing factors to this sort of stuff. And yeah, it's exactly that. And I think AWAB's law is, again, it's that accountability. It's going and going, you have to get a professional in, not just a tick kind of list going, I've seen these people kind of in damp old properties before as a letting agent, and they'll just, because they've got a fish tank, they'll go, oh, it's the fish tank. That's your fault. And then that's where it ends. And then the tenant feels like that's kind of the end of the process, whereas it's not the case. And it's like, yes, that may not be helping, and it certainly may need to be removed. But at the end of the day, that line needs to be drawn not by an estate agent or a letting agent or a managing agent, by somebody like a surveyor or a damp specialist, somebody who really can understand the building's pathology and kind of what's behind it. And also, it's important that they're fair to both sides. You're not going in there going, yeah, right, how much money can I get the tenant because I'm going to look really good, or how much can I defend the landlord? It's kind of just going in and making an impartial decision on the best course of action, just to make sure that that home is safe and livable, you know. But kind of linking that really to the new tech and how artificial intelligence comes into this, it's very much, it's expensive. It's, you know, at the moment, traditional surveys or paying professionals, it can be expensive. And then going down a solicitor route as well, if that's the case that it goes down, because a lot of these no-win, no-fee solicitors out there, especially for tenants regarding mould and unsafe homes, they can be quite biased and aggressive. And they, unfortunately, in some cases, there's an awful lot of funding available for tenants, but not much for landlords.
Mm.
And, you know, that works in the situations where you do have vulnerable people and families and they don't have any money. Fantastic. But then obviously, like everything, we get things that, you know, people abuse the system, and then landlords end up paying potentially thousands of pounds out just defending the fact that it's not their fault. And I think that that's a really, it's the right kind of way we're going, but it's not there yet. So I think with artificial intelligence, a lot of sensors are getting a lot cheaper now, whereas before, even a few years ago, you know, air quality sensors, radon sensors, carbon monoxide sensors, integrated temperature sensors, relative humidity sensors, all of these sensors were expensive and they didn't really talk to each other. The Internet of Things still isn't quite there yet for this type of living, breathing home that we need, which is a dynamic system that works continuously, gathering data through each room. But it's getting there. And when it gets there, we can then say, okay, well, are tenants or are the occupants opening windows? Are they using the heating appropriately? Are the extractor fans coming on? Is the boiler combusting correctly? Is there maintenance issues? You know, so all of this stuff can be analyzed and be put through a live, accurate report with a lot of labeled accurate data, which then a surveyor or a solicitor or somebody can look at from a desktop. So rather than, you know, spending thousands or tens of thousands on trying to discover who's at fault, we can then go, okay, give me the live report from the, I suppose, the brain of the house. And then you can then look at all of these different ranges and indices of data, and then be able to then identify, okay, yeah, well, this is, you know, your boiler's needing a maintenance repair because it's a, I don't know, 50% efficiency, or you've got a serious issue here with the combustion of the solid fuels you're putting in your solid fuel burner, and we're noticing a rise in carbon monoxide. All of this types of stuff, you can end up building a much bigger picture and a much more accurate picture than just going to site alone.
And in terms of you mentioned sensors there. What sort of sensors are we talking about here that would be able to detect that stuff? And are you seeing this kind of tech all being joined up? So it's all living in it's bringing all the data points into one singular platform or space where it can create that holistic view of the property in total as an ecosystem, as opposed to just taking out individual data points that, you know, are
Oh,
indicating high levels of moisture.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the minute, we're seeing almost, I suppose, a wave of individual bits of data and different sensors coming out. We've got some, such as Dyson, they're bringing out some pretty cool air filter machines, and also the sensors where you can download the app. But again, they're not quite there yet for, I suppose, a universal understanding, because the idea is, I suppose, these sensors need to be able to be monitored and understood from a 4-year-old's perspective up to a 90-year-old's perspective. And any kind of I suppose any kind of educational level as well. Whereas a lot of these at the moment, they're still in graphs and data-driven charts, and you've got to really understand what you're looking at. So that's a shift that really needs to be done. But yeah, 100%. You'd have something called an Internet of Things, which essentially is it could be through Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, these kind of things, which then connects everything almost like to a Google Home or a Alexa kit, where essentially you'd have a brain of the house, and then you can then have various different sort of particular matter 2.5, particular matter 10, which are the really tiny particles that if you breathe in, they can go through your lungs into your bloodstream. And then you can then have carcinogenics within that kind of issue as well, which then can increase your risk of cancer. Radon as well is another one, particularly within areas like Cornwall, where you've got a lot of granite in your bedrock and things like that. And all the way through to, air currents, air ventilation could be tracked, and the quality and consistency of extractor units as well. So we can then start looking at managing through predictive algorithms to be able to then detect when things need maintaining or when things are not quite right before they're even an issue to humans. And then we can then get them in and early, which then obviously reduces maintenance, reduces impact on health. I mean, the NHS is quite open about this. They're saying, they drain about 1.6 billion pounds a year on on illnesses that they directly link with people's internal kind of home environments. And if that was then updated and managed accordingly through things such as artificial intelligence, that we could see all of these different industries, including our healthcare, massively reduce. But as well as that, we're looking at things, like care homes, for example. We're seeing multi-generational living now. We're seeing people that are using homes like never before. It's not traditional homes that we're seeing, especially in inner cities now. We're seeing older parents. We're seeing grandparents staying in with relatives. We're seeing a lot of different dynamics to different homes, and therefore we need to be able to operate those accordingly for individuals. And at the moment, our homes are just not adequate for that. I think 25% of all housing stock across the globe is inefficient, is below habitable standards, should not exist, and that's just within kind of the Western world as well, which is pretty horrific when you think about it. And then obviously new homes are being, massively scaled up to very low quality the majority of time. And you have this common misconception with new builds as well, that everything is fine, it's under warranty, and they can actually be. I did a podcast and some content around like the new home smell. That could very much be an indication of unhealthy air, because a lot of internal air quality that testing I do in new homes and new builds, they use cheap paints, they use cheap adhesion carpets and all sorts of stuff, and they don't ventilate the properties, which they should do. And therefore, for a long sustained period of a good kind of 6 months of you living there, you will be inhaling this, and you won't be thinking about it. You'll be like, why would I? I'm in a brand new, and that's a big issue as well. So it really doesn't matter what the age of the property is. There's so many different reasons to have these sensors in place to be able to identify exact points, exact rooms, exact times of day. Then it can then link with the occupant behavior as well, because you might end up having a party, for example, when you have friends over, and at that specific time, you're cooking and breathing all in some specific area, and you've got a dog running outside and then comes in, and you kind of get foreign contaminants coming in. It's Christmas, this is a prime example. And being able to then identify things, so then next time you could go, well, actually, hold on a minute, maybe let's not do that, or let's correct that a little bit easier. Let's improve things in a way which is sustainable throughout.
So I don't know whether this is a fair comparison, but we obviously look at carbon monoxide as the silent killer, and I think it gets so much pushback in terms of not pushback, but I think people are more aware of it and more willing to put carbon monoxide monitors in their house, because the ultimate effect is that if you have a carbon monoxide leak, you're going to die. Whereas I think some of the stuff that you're sharing with us it's not immediately going to kill you, but there is long-term health effects that are going to take hold over a longer period of time. So
I think the problem you have with that is the fact not everyone has the same symptoms. And that's the hard part about it.
right.
Carbon monoxide, everyone has the same symptoms. You get high levels of that, you will end up dying. You'll fall asleep, never wake up again. It doesn't matter who you are. Whereas, there are some people out there, especially the older generations, they'll be still, using asbestos products and, living in homes with mold everywhere and out of date food and all sorts of stuff because it's kind of like this is what they're not used to, never get ill, and through the generations, it's the same kind of principle. It doesn't affect everyone the same. And there are some people, clients of mine as well, that I know that, they've had kidneys removed because they've completely shut down and failed. They've had cardiac arrests. They've developed asthma just being in a new home, and these are children as well. So unfortunately, it is a big risk, and you don't know whether you're going to be susceptible to it until you are exposed to it. And I don't really, and this kind of where my job really comes in is going, I don't want to take that risk. I don't want to take that risk to my family, and spreading the word of kind of going, look, it's important to understand the environment you live in because you don't want to take that risk. And most people, you might get a sniffle, you might get a little bit kind of your circadian rhythm and your sleep patterns might go a little bit, but there are those that it really will put you in a hospital and it really will mess your life up. And that's the problem, is it's not consistent throughout the population.
So just recap on some of the sort of major health issues that you see. Not sorry, not major ones, but the ones that we mentioned about the circadian rhythm and sort of respiratory. What are some of the sort of telltale signs that you're not living in a healthy environment?
Yeah, absolutely. The first ones are almost like an allergic reaction. So, itchy eyes, itchy throat, itchy insides of your ears, that kind of stuff, runny noses, sinus blocks, almost like you're getting a cold. You might get a bit wheezy on the chest, and then all of a sudden you might start noticing you're picking up more colds and coughs and things like that. And then your immune system starts dipping down. And then you can, you might yeah, so circadian rhythm is obviously your sleep patterns and making sure that you're going through a full duration of a sleep process. And a lot of the time, especially in mold kind of exposed rooms, you'll just wake up, you'll have light sleep patterns, you'll feel exhausted, and then all of a sudden, then that kicks into more kind of you feel more depressed, you get more anxious. This can also be a direct relation to the exposure as well. You can develop respiratory issues like you can always get kind of colds that then go straight to your lungs and your chest. You could then develop asthma. You can develop things like dust allergies. You can then go all the way through to actually kind of getting worse symptoms of if you're neurodivergent, for example, you could then actually start seeing more intense symptoms in your home environment, but when you go away for a few weeks, it calms down a bit. So these are all the, I suppose, lower end elements. And then obviously then you've got your carcinogenics and you can have, mold toxicity and actually get, it in your bloodstream, and then it can actually start working its way through your body. And then you can then, all sorts of things. You can start losing your hair. You can start losing weight. You can, you could develop cancer. Your organs can shut down. Like this is really extreme stuff that doesn't happen to a lot of people. So, people that are watching, don't think just because you've got a bit of mold, you're going to go to hospital. But this is the severity of it, and I think this is why it's so important to take it seriously because especially if you've got young children, because they obviously are still growing, and a lot of asthma in later life can be developed from this type of issue as well. So these are all the, I suppose, the telltale signs of an unhealthy home environment.
And that's really interesting to recap on that from the tenant's health perspective. If you're a landlord, or if you've got a new home that you're selling to potential buyers, but in terms of the health effect, what is the sort of long-term effect on the property itself? Because we've all been into properties where the wallpaper's coming off the wall, there's black spots, and that is pretty a far gone issue. but it's not the extent of what can happen to that property if it's not treated. What's the sort of final problem with that?
Yeah, I mean, you can go from anything from just a bit of damp, which, could be treated quite easily, to then it starts degrading the paint, just starts degrading the plaster. It will pop off in large sections. I mean, rising damp, typically the rule of thumb is it can kind of travel 1.2 meters up your wall, which is why in really bad cases you can get a tidal wave effect. That over long periods of time, if you've got cavities, you'll have a cavity wall ties in between, which basically hold the two skins of masonry together. If they are older, so typically predating 1981, where they're not galvanized quite correctly, they can then start rusting. Then you can then have those essentially failing and popping. So you get structural issues. Same with lintels, they can start failing, which are above windows and doors if you're getting water ingress and poor maintenance. Um, Not to mention, if you're trying to sell the property, and obviously, just from an aesthetic perspective, because damp can often look worse than it is, you can end up devaluing your property by just not maintaining it. So there's an awful lot of things that you really can, yeah, like even down from I've seen block gutters end up, needing half a wall being rebuilt because they've just been left for years, and something as simple as just getting a ladder and just scooping it out has then reverted to thousands of pounds worth of work. So this sort of stuff. Bathrooms are typically pretty bad as well, in the sense of you can have a couple of millimeters of cracked grouting or sealant. It doesn't take a lot, and then all of a sudden you can collate a lot of pooled water beneath on the ceiling, and then that water will eventually move that ceiling. And if it's an older ceiling, it can collapse the ceiling. And then obviously then you're running the risk of airborne asbestos as well if it's an older building. So it's just I suppose it's almost like a can of worms when you open that up. There's really almost no end to what could go on, really.
So it was really important that we addressed those two elements because obviously you've got the tenants, which every landlord should care about, but also the motivations for the long-term investment in those properties that the landlords are putting in is actually reflected in, the property itself and the state of the property. So if I'm a landlord or I'm a property developer and I've got homes, based on some of the sort of issues we've talked about and some of the health, is there any solutions that are available immediately for me to put into those properties to detect? And of course, cost is going to be an element as well. So if there's anything that's a little bit more cost effective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the main things, the key things before investing in any technology or anything else is your golden three, which is making sure it's insulated. The envelope of your property is well insulated. You don't have cold spots, anything like that, where heat can escape and then you get kind of cold surfaces, which can then condensate black spot mold. Well ventilated, both background ventilation, passive, so trickle vents, things like that, through to mechanical. So you can have like HVAC systems, things like that, which can then continuously cycle the air and provide more of a stable kind of temperature, and basically kind of takes out the moisture of the air and helps improve the air quality. So things like that are really important, and obviously then heating as well. So making sure that the heating in the property is up to spec, it's well maintained and adequate for the property. Because a lot of people, especially landlords, they don't understand that keeping those three things in check when the property is vacant, it still will cost you a bit of money, but it will not cost you as much as the issues that you'll face when all of a sudden you get a tenant in, and then because it's been left 6 months without any heating on, no windows open, things like that, things start, smelling, especially older properties. If you get a bit of cracking on the outside render or whatever, you're going to start getting moisture coming in. If you've got any types of damp issues, damp will win, and then you will end up having a bigger issue than just maintaining those golden three, really. But I think going back to your I suppose in the future type, everything needs to make sense. I do really think that real-time well-being metrics are so important. So almost having a well-being EPC. So actually then being able to have some kind of ranking system for a home similar to an EPC, because EPCs are starting to, I suppose, gain a bit more notice with tenants. If you've got two properties on the same road and they're pretty much in the same position and condition, but one's a B and the other one's a D, a lot more people will tend to be aware of why the B is more important, and therefore they'll tend to go towards it because it's obviously going to be, in theory, cheaper to keep lovely and warm and maintained. So I think the more we get used to well-being inside our homes being as important as it is, I think then the more value is going to go on actually those, I suppose, those technologies and making sure that that home is as safe as possible, really.
Great. I quite like that idea, even just having a section on the EPC itself to reflect the well-being, because the
Yeah.
energy side of it is tied quite nicely into how you're ventilating the home and how much insulation it is. I know
But
that.
that's theoretical. Now, obviously, with the EPC stuff, they are getting better with it, but it is still theoretical.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that in terms of the passive house sort of phase of things that was going on, is that if you were to have there's never been a house ever that's got 100 on an EPC. Even the
Mm.
passive house stuff is still about 97, 98. And those actually, if you were to buy and live one in a passive house, it's incredibly unhealthy for you to live in because they're essentially creating a sealed vacuum in order.
Absolutely. And the problem with passive house, that kind of trend is they tried implementing it in homes that really don't do well under those conditions. So if you're renovating an old, say, 1800s, 1900s home where it's solid stone, solid brick, cob, whatever it may be, the whole point is meant to be a bit drafty. It's meant to have airflow. It's meant to be able to breathe. And then when you start stopping that, then that's when the big issues, they kind of become accelerated issues. And yeah, and I think a lot of contractors kind of failed to understand that in the early days. And even now, unfortunately, we see quite a lot of it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And we've talked about carbon monoxide alarms, and we've talked about sort of having an EPC, but also having a safety rating. One of the things would be quite interesting to see if they could have those sensors and detectors in the home alongside the way you would buy a fire alarm, a carbon monoxide alarm. Is there
Yeah.
anything that's available on the market currently that you would recommend, especially for landlords that can't be at their properties, or don't live anywhere near their properties? They can't see any sort of immediate signs of moisture or damp that are built.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a few, like I revert back to the Dyson one, there are a few out there that have the really cool app kind of data, so you don't even need to be there to track it. I think at the minute they are still classed as more of an investment. Carbon monoxide alarms, for example, you can get two for £12 in your local shop, and fire alarms that are essentially battery operated at the same kind of cost, whereas when you're looking at accurate smart hubs and things like that, you're then kind of going probably you would want to spend between 80 and 150 pounds. So on a I say a three-bedroom home, that kind of size. So yes, it's still definitely worth it, but I think we're just not quite there yet because I think what would be great is then having your smart lighting integrated, your all of your air quality sensors. So all you're kind of making sure all of your particulate matters, not getting too high, your air quality index is not getting too high, being able to identify any radon issues, a day again, adapting and including carbon monoxide. But how cool would it be to then include wearables? Because obviously, if you take it one step further and you have a system in your home which is then cross-compatible, you could then sign into some kind of your I suppose your home account, almost like a family service package. And then, everyone in that home would have their own identity in that home, which would then be able to then monitor your health through your wearables, be able to then have that linked to your smart fridge, be able to then, so I think getting these costs down and actually then having them more commercially available and cross-compatible with an Internet of Things in your home is absolutely vital. But you could then almost have a digital ID which is in your wearable. So then what you could do is you could, if you went on, I don't know, you went on to a hotel somewhere, you could then, if there was the same types of systems of these types of artificial intelligence within these commercial premises as well, there's no reason why then that digital ID could then be linked to your hotel room, and then it could then have the perfect conditions for your internal health for you before you even arrive. And, this is the sort of thing that could really make, and commercializing, I mean, it's like profitability as well for businesses, because a lot of offices, they can be too hot because there's too much equipment in there, there's too many people, they've got horrible fans on the wall, whatever it may be. And then you get sick days that are increased, you're reducing productivity, and, there's a huge impact on the economy as well. So eventually, I'm hoping there's going to be the right metrics in place to be able to say, actually, this is quantifiable, to be able to then invest in this in your business. So if you have an office or hospitality, whatever it may be, you could then, get the wearables of your employees and make sure that there is a balance through the artificial intelligence algorithm, which is already learned through the labeled data and, trained specifically to these needs, to then be able to really be able to push that forward and really optimize that for your staff. And then, like everything else, I think we were going earlier on to care homes, for example. A lot of elderly don't want to be, they want to be independent living. But also then at the minute, dare I say it, it is quite a burden on the family, because you're forever worrying, one of the family members have to always go around, and then that individual might feel a bit like they're being hassled or babied. And there are some case studies now, a couple in America and over here, where they actually have independent living with the sort of different sensors in homes and things like that, where they're anonymized. They're you don't have cameras on you, but it will track to make sure where you are, to make sure you're healthy. If you're in need, then you've got an immediate alert system, and these people then immediately start seeing an uplift in their morale, their well-being, and their longevity of living. There was a really interesting case in America, actually, with a positive reinforcement robot. It's a psychologist robot in a dorm for American football. And it was like a hug machine, and it would then allow all of the students on campus to have positive reinforcement about and be able to have interaction with this robot. And it proved it was a huge success. So, I think the only limitations are what we put on ourselves for what this kind of technology can really give us and our future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to go, before I go to my final question, Jason, I'm just going to say, if anyone's got any questions, do please put them in the chat, because we will get round to them. We'd love to hear what your opinions are and what your thoughts are. If you've got any questions for Jason, or any examples that you've been facing with your own properties, then please do put them in the chat. And yeah, we'll get round to those very, very shortly. So, Jason, in terms of one of the major points with AI and more wider with technology, is the data side of it. And
Yes,
you touched on the digital IDs, which I think may have sent a shudder down some of our members' backs when you ever mentioned the word digital ID. But
absolutely.
isn't there a danger? And I really sort of champion what you're saying, because it does make a lot of sense, but and for convenience, right? Like, if there's we both know men and women are heated differently, like in terms of temperatures, and there is often conflicts within the workplace between what temperature is right and what temperature is wrong. And I can imagine that's the same in the home. And if you've got that situation and you're able to share that information with a central system that is able to keep the property not only to a certain level, but also accommodate everyone's needs, fantastic. Like, everyone's happy and the home is healthy. But having to upload that data or share that data with a centralized system will terrify a lot of people. Is
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great point. And yeah, to be honest with you, I think the only way this is ever going to be adapted to the scale that it needs to be is transparency. And I think a transparency of not the individual users, but the actual people creating these devices. Because I think very much it should be down to personal circumstances and what you are happy to share. Now, a lot of this data, this is kind of Internet of Things in your home, would be what's called a closed loop system. So it means that it won't go anywhere else. It's not going, when we say a centralized system, it would be something like an internal main brain of your home. So it's not going anywhere else, staying there to be able to be used for your benefit. Now, if you then choose to we'll use digital fingerprint very lightly because it's not the same. When I'm kind of referring to a digital fingerprint, it's not tracking your every move. What it would then do is have, I suppose, almost like a health and recommend or a health, like a health portfolio of you. So you would then be able to go, okay, this is the lighting that you prefer. This is the air quality, the temperature, all of this stuff, like being able to then, even down to ambient lighting, ambient sounds, a huge amount of data that can then be in that fingerprint, but it doesn't then have to have your name, your address, your age, all of the identification stuff. We're just looking at well-being data. That's it. So it's labeled anonymous data, but it's kept on your, I suppose, digital little safe wallet when you're in your wearable. So that would be really important because, I think a lot of artificial intelligence, there's a lot of gray area around trust at the moment about, if I'm putting my data in there, where's it going? Is it being sold somewhere else? But also, I think there's a bigger interconnecting industry benefit here where you could say, okay, well, how about you can, if you choose to share this data with, say, your insurance provider for health insurance, for example, if you're really healthy and you're in your 60s, your 70s, you've looked after yourself so long, why should you be in the same category as somebody who has never looked after themselves? They're the same age as you, but then you're just a number. You're 70, okay, so your price of your thing is going to be X. I know there's a history and there's a lot of things that go into it, but if it can be more complex and integrate your digital well-being, I suppose, portfolio, wallet, whatever you want to call it, you can then end up having a financial benefit from being able to then share that, but it should be the user's choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Fiona's dropped in a good question here. Are there any other countries using AI for homes?
Yeah, absolutely. Canada, they're doing quite a lot of stuff around care homes as well. I mentioned obviously America's doing quite a lot around a lot of other things in the sense of robots in your home and being able to almost have a companion there. There's a lot around. So the World Health Organization, is really pumping out the international type of awareness for this, which is then allowing a lot more countries to be, especially in the EU as well, because we are needing to get another 35 million buildings by 2030 up to code, and actually be able to. We're not going to do that without some kind of creative input. So the more of this type of case studies that come out, that get published about, that get reviewed, I think the more trust is going to be there, and then obviously the more demand for these types of things, then the price starts coming down. But I suppose the real thing is who is going to be able to, or who is going to be willing to make it cross-compatible, and that's the issue. Because if Apple come up with something, I guarantee you're going to need all the Apple products, and it's not going to be compatible with anything else. And if you go into a hotel or somewhere else, if that was the way that we ended up going, it go, oh wow, it's not compatible. Sorry, it's only iOS, Apple, and vice versa for Amazon and all these other things. So I think crossing that bridge of kind of somehow making it, cross-platform is the only way it's really going to take on something that's meaningful, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it needs to feed into every element of the home so that because I don't think that people are going to it's not going to warrant too much of a requirement if it's just monitoring something so specific as moisture.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, you're running the risk of almost having a monopoly of, so if reverting back to the Apple thing, if you had, say, an Apple Home docking station, which was the brain of all these things, but it was only compatible with Apple products, and then all of a sudden you wanted to change your extractor fan or your lighting for something else, it's then okay, well, it's not compatible with the system anymore. Well, I have no choice. Otherwise, I have to replace everything in my system, and all of a sudden it just becomes unviable, and therefore it becomes a gimmick. So yeah, that to me is quite important.
Great. Well, Jason, thank you so much for tonight. I really appreciate you
Pleasure.
your evening to come and share with us. It's been another fascinating webinar. And yeah, thank you so much. Where can people find you if they want to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on jason-ratcliffe.co.uk or atlantic-edge.co.uk. I'm also on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all of the main kind of social media platforms, just under at Jason Ratcliffe Surveyor. I do a lot of the wellbeing stuff free of charge completely. There's a lot of people across the country that message me with photos and how do I do this? What do you think of that? There is no, for this type of stuff, there is absolutely no sales ploy or hook to try and get money out of people. It is just there to help the general public.
Great stuff. Well, thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone. We will be back
Absolutely.
next week where I'll be interviewing Mark Burrows, who's the host of Ming and also founder of SureStop. He'll be talking about the homelessness crisis and how he's single-handedly trying to put an end to it across Birmingham. So I hope you can join us for that one on Tuesday next week. And please do keep sharing all your amazing posts in the UK Homes Network. If you have enjoyed tonight, let us know in the platform. And of course, you can reach out to Jason in there as well. So, yeah, we'll see you all next week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.